Traces of the nerve agent used to poison a former Russian spy and his daughter have reportedly been found in a restaurant in the British city of Salisbury. The pair had had a meal there 2 hours before being found unconscious on a park bench. The pizzeria is now one of 5 sites cordoned off by police as part of their ongoing investigation. Jacqueline Vuga picks up the story.
A week ago, 2 people were found collapsed on an unremarkable bench near a quiet shopping centre in Salisbury. The area was sealed off and a major incident was declared at the hospital where the pair were being treated for exposure to an unknown substance. But no one really took much notice of the man and the woman until about 24 hours later, when breaking news reports began to flood the airways that the 66-year-old man was in fact Sergei Skripal, a former Russian spy.
Sergei Skripal started in the Soviet Airborne Forces. He quickly moved to Russia's Foreign Military Intelligence Agency, the GRU. On a mission to the Mediterranean region in '95, he was recruited by a man calling himself Antonio Alvarez de Hidalgo, a British intelligence talent spotter, real name Pablo Miller. Skripal exposed at least 300 Russian spies to the UK. He handed over the GRU's entire phone directory, doing inestimable damage to Moscow. 5 years on, Colonel Skripal retired from the GRU on health grounds, but continued moving crucial information to Britain's MI6. They codenamed him Forthwith and bought him a timeshare holiday home on Spain's south coast. The double agent was convicted in 2006 of treason, getting a 13-year sentence in a top-security Russian jail. But just 4 years later, he was freed in a high-profile spy swap between Moscow and Washington. Skripal moved to the southern British town of Salisbury, where his recruiter Pablo Miller allegedly lives. The ex-spy then enjoyed a fairly low profile, till now.
The first speculations appear with immediate parallels drawn to another former Russian agent poisoned in London 12 years ago, with a public inquiry later laying the blame squarely at the Kremlin's feet. Was history repeating itself? And it didn't stop there. Every wild theory was given its day in the sun. Was it North Korea? Was it Russia's revenge for treason after all these years? Was Putin being framed? Is it linked to the Trump-Russia collusion investigation?
We need to make sure that we respond not to rumour, but to all the evidence that they collect.
This investigation is at the early stages, and any speculation is unhelpful at this time.
If we are to be rigorous in this investigation, we must avoid speculation.
We'd urge people not to speculate.
Such warnings did nothing to quell the fires, however. As police revealed that Skripal and his daughter were deliberately targeted with a nerve agent, news reports charged forward theorizing that the attack came from the very top in Moscow.
Bad things have been known to happen to Russians who cross Vladimir Putin.
The fact that a nerve agent was used strengthens the likelihood that this was a state sponsor of some sort, and Russia is the chief suspect, of course.
That does look like an act of provocation by Putin, who has been making increasingly bold and brazen moves in the West.
The British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson joined the chorus as well. Yes to more sanctions on Russia, and no to the upcoming Football World Cup. That is, if the Kremlin is indeed involved.
We must be very careful in what we say because it is too early to prejudge the investigation. But if the suspicions that I know on both sides of the House prove to be well-founded, then it may very well be, Mr. Speaker, that we are forced to look again at our regime, our sanctions regime, and other measures that we may seek to put in place.
Russia hit back at Johnson's comments, calling them wild, and aimed at damaging relations between the two countries. And while the investigation continues and concrete details are few and far in between, the public court looks to have already solved the crime.
An attack of this nature at any time, especially this time on the part of the Russian government, would constitute a monumental act of political self-harm, resulting in severe and significant reputational damage across the world.
Obviously, the shadows and the resonance in so many people's minds are going to be from the Alexander Litvinenko case, because that dominated the British headlines for so long. And it seems, at least superficially, that there are parallels here.
Let's face it, you know, in intelligence terms, he was a busted flush. He had been caught in Russia, he'd been convicted, been sent to prison, he'd been pardoned and allowed to go free. So, you know, the Russian authorities will have picked him clean of any intelligence he had, which would be useful to them. And as soon as he got to the UK, MI6 would have done the same thing. So, you know, in terms of his old intelligence role, there's really nothing more to add to it. So, in terms of what he might have been involved in now, I think that's where the motivation is going to be found, and that's what the intelligence agencies and the police are going to be investigating intensively at the moment.